Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music. And this video is going to be about a band called The Rockets. And not to be confused with a number of other bands over the last 30, 40, 50 years called The Rockets, including Jim McCarty from Cactus went back to Detroit and formed a band called The Rockets. So they're definitely probably the more higher profile band called The Rockets. But there was this band called The Rockets in 1968, and it's definitely a really cool kind of American rock with some psychedelic elements. And so they eventually turned into Crazy Horse. Briefly, they were called War Babies. Went from the Rockets to War Babies, and then Neil Young decided to call them Crazy Horse. And of course, everyone knows about Neil Young and his association with Crazy Horse that continues to this day, and a really cool band. And apparently Neil Young saw something in them when they were the Rockets, and ended up choosing them to play on some of his solo work. And now, of course, Crazy Horse is a household word. But this album came out in 1968. It was produced by Larry Goldberg and released on the White Whale label, which of course had the Turtles and a number of other interesting obscure bands of that time. Atlantic apparently was interested at one point and turned them down. But the album came out and only sold about 5,000 copies, so they definitely latched on to Neil Young at the right time because nothing seems like it was going to be happening with the Rockets. And then, of course, they ended up releasing three original albums by Crazy Horse without Neil Young, and another Crazy Horse album was released many years later. But I'll be doing a separate video on the Crazy Horse albums themselves because they were definitely a band unto themselves. And so when Neil Young signed them up, he got a lot of talent. And when you hear the Crazy Horse albums, it's easy to see how their aesthetic and Neil Young's aesthetic lined up. But the Rockets had an interesting lineup. Of course, Danny Whitten on guitar and vocals, Billy Talbot on bass, Ralph Molina on drums. The core trio went on to be the Crazy Horse that we know, both from their regular albums and the Neil Young albums. But then they also had a second guitar player, George Whitesell, and then a violin player, Bobby Notkoff. So very unusual in 1968, and particularly playing this kind of roots-oriented Americana rock with some psychedelic elements. There's a song on there called Pills Blues, which is a great, somewhat heavy blues tune. So there's a lot going on this record, and I really got to give a shout out to Bobby Notkoff on violin. His violin work on this record is very adventurous, and a lot of interesting, uh, somewhat avant-garde techniques. So he really adds a lot to this record and gives it a more of a psychedelic feel. But definitely a one of a kind band and record. Just to have, like I say, to have this kind of roots rock, Americana rock, um, with some psychedelic elements, and then have this very prominent violin on every song really gives them a sound all their own. So I highly recommend it. I'm not going to go through all the songs. There's a similar feel to a lot of the stuff with the two guitar attack. Not a whole bunch of leads, but they kind of make up for it by having these really unusual violin parts. But to have this two guitar, bass, drums, and vocal lineups with a violin is really crazy, and makes this band definitely one of a kind. And all the material is really good. I couldn't find really anything to criticize. Obviously, a pretty solid band. Um, Fairly medium tempo, so we don't really get to see the rhythm section step out and do anything stunning. But as far as serving the music, they do a great job. And Danny Whitten's a cool singer and a cool guitar player, and so it's all there. Just a really unusual band, hard to find a spot to put them or an easy label to put on them. But definitely another one of those really cool bands that made the transition from psychedelia into more of a 70s sound, and with the addition of that violin, somewhat experimental. So highly recommended. It's really cool to see them get their due now, and I'll be doing a video on Crazy Horse coming up in the next few weeks as well. But Rocket's definitely a great one to have in the collection and a great listen. And it's just gotten better over the years because once again with that the interesting violin work, the record is very forward looking and really stands up to the test of the time. And there's no anachronisms on it. There's no weird orchestrations or kind of hippy dippy kind of music incorporated into it. There's not a bunch of ballads that may or may not work. It's just strong, medium tempo rock with some ragged edges and cool instrumental work and cool songs and a cool singer. So Rockets, good stuff. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for checking out I Hate Rock Music.